the point that we would like to make, or at least that I would like to make, is that national security, as it relates to climate and the changing climate, is something that doesn't necessarily compute for our larger citizenry. And so the purpose to bring a movie like this is to get the word out, get the conversation going, raise your interest, and have you be knowledgeable in your conversations with people that may not have thought of national security when they see a changing climate.
When I was in Europe, I spent a lot of time down in Africa. And one of the places I went was the Lake Chad Basin. And this was in the 90s. And I was going down there when the little ruckus was going on in one of the countries. And I remember going around the basin and seeing how large the lake was at that time. And it was, much smaller than that. This summer, I went to the same location in Africa. I flew over Lake Chad, and it was amazing how much smaller it is. But when we talk about what's going on and what the threat is to our national security, it's a much more complex situation. You have so many factors that are playing with each other. On Lake Chad, you're seeing the lake dry up. They had 150,000 fishermen on that lake. And now one of the issues is the fishermen and the cattle herders are in conflict. Chaos is being generated. Boko Haram is taking advantage of it, of operating in ungoverned spaces. Why are we here? Well, one of the things, there are 200 million young folks in Africa between the ages of 17 and 24. And in the next 30 years, that's going to double. And 60% of them haven't got any jobs. And all of this is made so much worse because of the economic impact of the drying up of the Lake Chad Basin, of the violence that's existing between the people that live there in relative peace. One day, and it already has, we've had American military killed in that area because we know we've got to come in at this earlier time in order to try to strengthen those governments so that they can withstand Boko Haram and the others. But let me tell you, we need to act on this. We need to support international development. We need to realize the threat of climate change, because when we don't, we pay eventually in the greatest treasure we have in America, and that's the blood of our 17 to 24-year-olds. Today, like many of you, I come from a different generation. I remember the 60s and what was going on there. I mean, do you remember how it was with the military back then? How the military was viewed? And for those of us that came in at that time and spent the last 40 years rebuilding the military from Vietnam, it's really heartening to see the confidence and the place that the military holds in our society. And I sure hope that we don't lose it, and I don't think we will. I raised my hand 10 times to swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I did it twice at the second lieutenant, because you can never do anything right the first time as a second lieutenant. But that we are ingrained from the very beginning to do the right thing, and it is told to us that if we get a legal order or try to push anything that compromises our integrity or goes against what we know to be right, then we push back on it. And I think the military is keeping that up now, with Jim Madison and the others that are doing it. Thank you.
And I just want to add to that, hope is not a strategy, but I have that same hope that General Castellaw talked about. I have been on a number of bases, as he has, in the recent past. I know that the young men and women of our military are doing great things, and they did great things right here in Houston during a little blip you had on the weather here not too long ago. And they were stretched here, and they're stretched in a lot of other places, but those young men and women salute, and they get with it. And when we talk about politicization of the troops, I really take issue with that. They will take orders, legal orders, and they will do it in a way that it needs to be done. And I don't want the American people, and I don't think the American people should have a doubt about that. But we need to keep an eye on our political process, because those things can go awry. Let's just be aware of that.
In the Marine Corps, as a result of what we saw supporting the forward operating bases, we started using solar power, wind generators. We've developed alternative fuels to use. Next door in Tucson, Arizona, at the Air Force Base, they've had a tremendous project on reducing the amount of fossil fuels used with solar power on their homes and so forth. The Army is using a policy of net zero, where they produce, support the installations, the energy that they need, and so forth. When we talk about our plans, the impact of climate is considered. When we make those plans, we see that as we talk about the Lake Chad Basin, South Sudan. You know, there are 4 countries in the world right now: Yemen, Somalia, South Sudan, and Nigeria, that are near famine, and many of the reasons that are associated with that is drought and climate change going on. And so they're having to make their military plans and take into consideration migration and the requirement for food supplies and stuff like that. So I mean, it is part of what we do in the military now to take that into consideration, both when we're talking about garrison as well as others. And I'll finish with others. I joined Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, and a sailor in a study on sea level rise. And for instance, in South Carolina, we've got a Marine Corps air station, and we just put $800 million into the facilities to support the F-35 strike fighter. And what we're seeing is that the sea level rise is going to imperil the facilities that we're doing now. So that is now becoming one of the factors that we're taking into effect when we do that. We need to think about, okay, 20 years, 30 years, what's going to be going to happen on that. Norfolk, under the same situation with the Navy piers and so forth, and Norfolk, as the rise comes up and it imperils the facilities, and that impacts our training and our ability to deploy operations.
I would only briefly add that this idea of national security having a real important involvement in response to climate change goes back not 1 year, not 5 years, not 10 years, but more than 20 years. So you've had a rotation of senior people, well, people that got to be senior by working their way up, and they have seen their installations apply new technology, as General Castellaw just mentioned, whether it's fuels or renewable energy or a lot of different things, in response to concerns that have been well identified. So this is not something that just happened. It may be that the American people are just putting climate change and national security in a category that they need to worry about. That's fairly new. And you are really in the vanguard of people that that do understand that now that you've been with the Marine. So that's enough said.
They're planning now for that movement there, okay, as people are pushed out of those areas. Boko Haram comes in, they destroy houses, kidnap the people, force them into to their armed forces, and then you're also having violence between villages as they compete for the resources that are diminishing. And as a result of that, you're getting migration, people moving. Somalia, the same thing. Drought in Somalia is forcing immigration and movement, and our forces, our people in the Horn of Africa are having to deal with that as that occurs. And of course, we already know what happened with Syria when we had the droughts in the early 2000s and pushed a lot of the people that were out in the rural areas into the cities, and we had the impact there. So, yes, planning is going on. Yes, there's concern. Oftentimes, we're late to get it done.
And I think I would add that there are lots of countries that are planning about how to prevent migration. Preventing migration does not stop humanity from trying to migrate because of circumstances, as we pointed out. And therefore, conflict is a greater possibility. And so the cycle continues. I'm not particularly successful at that. I'll be honest with you, convincing somebody that has made up their mind that it's false science or it's not happening, it is a very, very tall order. And it can lead to family conflict, it can lead to friends not being friends anymore. And I find that very, very sad, because we just need to have conversations about it. I need to listen better. I need to think hard before I tell somebody what I really think. Maybe I just need to be more like a Marine.
I can't add anything to that.
Well, let's definitely give a huge round of applause for both of us.